Complacency. Noun. Self-satisfaction, especially when accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. Hey everyone, this is another episode of Professional American, and it's Friday, August 27th. I'm doing this a little earlier than I usually do. I know I did once a month. I might still do another one for September. I'm not sure yet. But given the events that have played out over the last 2 weeks, and specifically yesterday, I decided to get some things off of my mind. I actually do have an outline in front of me. So this is mildly scripted, so it'll be less off the cuff than before. But this is going to be named Afghanistan II. I'm going to start with why I started with the word complacency. And to do that, we have to go back to when I was in basic training in 2004. I had drill sergeants that would almost constantly remind us when we would screw up something in a training environment. I remember it. I remember it very well. 2 words. Complacency kills. The minute you let your guard down, the minute you decide that everything's going to be okay, anytime you do that, it allows an opportunity for someone to do something that you are not prepared for. This happens all the time. If you don't have a good password on your email, or maybe your bank account, because there's no way anyone could ever guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 $. That's not my password. Just want to make that clear. Well, you're complacent, and somebody will guess it, and then you're screwed. If you don't lock the doors in your house or your car because, I just don't need to do that. Well, the moment someone does, you're screwed. All because you did not think it was necessary. You had a self-satisfaction, especially when accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. If you're not aware that the actual danger to not locking your house is someone breaking in, potentially stealing, and potentially causing harm to yourself or your loved ones, that's complacency. In basic training, we would train for, it felt like everything. And at times, it also felt like we were training for the same thing over and over and over again. Why? Why did we always why was one lesson beaten into us for hours, days, weeks at a time? One lesson. Why? Because ultimately what you learn later, and this was more than just basic training, this was also our mobilization for our deployment training. You train for stress. You train for the bad times so that when the bad times happen, you're not scrambling to go, oh crap, what was that thing that I was taught by so-and-so? I don't remember. Your training becomes a reflex. And if you don't have the training, or you have piss poor training, you will have no reflex. There's a saying, and I'm probably going to mess the guy's name up, Archilochus. The saying is, we don't rise to the level of our expectations. We fall to the level of our training. And that could not be more true. If you have no training for a stressful situation, you will just fall. There's nothing. If you have mediocre training, which I would argue I probably have mediocre training that I received over a decade ago. If I only relied on that old training, I would fall to that every time, which is better than nothing. This is why education is an always evolving and ongoing process. It does not stop when you leave high school, trade school, community college, bachelor's degree, master's. Anytime someone says something is settled, we don't need to do this anymore, false. You need to continue educating and training. Now, let's move on to Afghanistan. I'm going to read something that I wrote back on the 20th, so 1 week ago today. Ironically, the title is called Thoughts on Afghanistan, Complacency Kills. It is up on the blog over at thebeardeddetailer.com/blog. If you have not read it already, well, I'm going to read it to you. If you have, well, bear with me. Maybe you missed something the first time around. The last week has been a wild ride of emotions for myself, and I'm sure I'm not alone. Watching the events of Afghanistan play out over the news and social media has brought back memories, and now a new emotion that I don't think I have really had to deal with over the last 12 years. I never claimed to be an expert on the region, nor have I been shy to talk about my experiences in Afghanistan. But this week, I have had people reach out to get my take on what is going on. I will admit that maybe I am not the one to be talking about this. Maybe we should all be looking to people with much more time with their boots on the ground there and with much more wisdom than I possess. However, I've been asked, and never one to stray away from talking, here I am to write down my thoughts. This will be just as much for me as it will be for anyone that will take the time to read my thoughts. I want to start by mentioning that our military is 100% volunteer. No one is being drafted and forced to serve in uniform today, and because of this, every service member that has joined since the 11th of September 2001 knew exactly what was at stake. We knew that we would be called upon to leave our country and travel to a foreign country to fight and possibly not come home. Yes, we might not have known the details of what lay ahead, but anyone that thought otherwise was seriously misled. We signed up for our people, the citizens of the United States. We wanted to put an end to those that caused the terror attacks, and we wanted to prevent that from happening again. I believe then, as I still do today, that we were justified with going into Afghanistan 1 month after the attacks. At the time, the mission was clear. But as time went on, what we saw was a changing of the mission, moving the goalpost. Anyone that thinks that the Afghanistan conflict is black and white, this side or that, is very mistaken in my opinion. It isn't that simple, and several things can be true at once. The people of Afghanistan are simple people that just want to be left alone and live their lives. I think once we got there and saw the conditions, people in power thought they could nation build and make the place better, which, to be honest, was never going to happen on the grand scale. Maybe little things here and there, schools, hospitals, roads. But the one factor that was ignored was time. It was said a long time ago that Americans have all the watches, but the Afghans have all the time. And while we did beat back the Taliban, I do not think it was considered that they would just wait it out and play the long game. After all, we haven't been the first foreign fighters to step foot there, and we won't be the last. It is really hard to have this conversation while remaining apolitical, but it is important to point out that the real failure in Afghanistan over the last 19 years has been at the political level. Presidents, representatives, lobbyists, and generals are all the reasons that we are watching this play out this way. Once you reach a certain level of government, you start focusing on your own interests and not the mission. The people focused on the mission were the boots on the ground, actually interacting with the people in Afghanistan, sweating from the 100-degree temperatures, carrying over 50 pounds of gear, sleeping in plywood huts and sometimes less, and breathing in sand, feces, and an endless amount of smoke from the nearby burn pit. Once in a while, a colonel or a general will fly in and see how things are, and of course, a happy face is put on to make things look great. And then they leave to report that all is well. If they actually stayed in country, on a combat outpost or forward operating base, for the same 9 months as the average Joe, then I think this might have played out differently. The reality is, part of what some people have been saying lately is true. This collapse was always going to happen. I remember having this conversation back in 2008, though I had no idea this was going to be a discussion 13 years later. Younger me would have had no problem just bombing everything and letting the region start over. The problem with that is, as long as there is one person alive that shares the same ideology as the Taliban, there will always be an opportunity to start up a group of people and take over using violence and power. Killing women for not covering up, forcing women and girls into sex slavery and calling it marriage, and taking away weapons from the people just in case they want to rise up. By us being there in the country, this was not happening, at least on the grand scale that it was. What else wasn't happening? Large-scale terrorism planning. When we disrupted the Taliban's control, it made their life harder when trying to orchestrate events like the 9/11 attacks. In my opinion, maintaining Kandahar and Bagram airfields alongside the Afghan army and having that be a duty station similar to Germany, Korea, and Japan would have been the right thing to do. And in reality, it's what we were doing. Protecting the embassy in Kabul and maintaining a small presence on the ground and in the air would have been the right thing to do. It would have been the right thing to do back in 2008. Anyone that has spent more than 5 seconds looking into this would have predicted that a rapid pullout would create the vacuum that it did. The fact that there are generals saying, publicly mind you, that they didn't think this would happen speaks to either their ignorance or their lack of caring. What 2020 showed us was that we could have a small skeleton force in the region, alongside our allies, and not let the Taliban take back the country. In 2010, the U.S. had 496 fatalities in Afghanistan, the highest over the entire time there. In 2020, that number was 9, with the last 2 deaths being Javier Gutierrez and Antonio Rodriguez on the 8th of February. One could argue that since there were less troops there, then yes, statistically there would be less deaths. Well, isn't the goal of war to have as few casualties as possible while completing the mission? I would argue, yes. For those that served and deployed there, both military and civilian, it wasn't for nothing. Although it may feel that way, we did our jobs and the mission was accomplished. We disrupted the Taliban and prevented them from shoving women and girls into submission. We prevented more terror attacks, though people seem to think that just because an attack didn't happen means we didn't need to be there. We did what we set out to do. Osama bin Laden was shot in the face. Mission accomplished. Do not let anyone tell you that your service was for nothing simply because politicians yanked the plug. No one was injured or died in vain because they did so in service to a mission that was necessary and accomplished. The only failure here is leadership. Failure to listen, failure to plan, failure to accept responsibility. This happened during the Vietnam War, and because of a failure to read and study history, here we are, watching it repeat itself in double time. It wasn't the fault of those that served in Vietnam, and it isn't the fault of those that served in the war in Afghanistan. We must stay strong, and even though our story has been ignored by our friends, neighbors, and family for the last 19 years, do not let it anger you if they ask now. America has a complacency problem, and it will always fall on those that chose to do what more than 90% of Americans chose not to do. I meant every word in that. I meant it then, and I mean it now. When I say America has a complacency problem, it really does. 9/11 happened because of a complacency problem. When you go back and read history, you can see that we allowed things to happen. And because we were complacent and thought this will never come here, this will never happen on our soil, well, it opened up the opportunity for it to happen. This is going on right now in regards to the government response to COVID as well. And not even the government response, but with the actual citizens of our country in COVID. We're so complacent. We have no problem sitting around on our asses every single day, shoving garbage into our faces and allowing ourselves to become lazier and fatter and unhealthier than any time in history. And yet, we're puzzled when a strange virus comes in and starts claiming the lives of those people. Whatever shall we do? It's funny, and not in a ha-ha kind of funny, but in a quizzical kind of way, that the people who seem least affected by this virus, statistically, and you don't have to call me, well, hell, you can call me whatever you want, but statistically are people who are metabolically healthy, who have put in the work to not be a slug on a log. Those are the people who are, yes, they are still catching it. They're being infected. However, they're recovering. They're kicking its ass. But not to get down that rabbit hole. Back to Afghanistan. Those who signed up during the global war on terrorism, we served for our country. We didn't serve for the people of other countries. I didn't sign the dotted line and say, I want to go help the people of Afghanistan and Iraq. I did it for the United States citizens. I took my oath, and those listening who also did the same, you took your oath for our country, for our people, for those who perished, those who remain, and for those in the future, so that they may not face the same fate that those who perished did. As I wrote in the article, our mission was accomplished. The Taliban was kicked back very early on. We kicked their ass. Obviously, we lost people in the fight. But again, the mission was to kick their ass for allowing Al-Qaeda to be present in Afghanistan and plan the terror attacks. They refused to give up bin Laden, so we kicked their ass for it. And not only did we kick their ass, we still found bin Laden, and we shot him in the face, and he is dead. Mission accomplished. Another 9/11 has not happened. It's easy to become complacent for 90% of the country because 90% of the country isn't doing the work needed to make sure that that doesn't happen. It's easy to sit on your butt and go, man, I had a shitty day. Meanwhile, there's people working their asses off to make sure your electricity stays on so that your air conditioning can keep you cool. And that the water that's being pumped, if you have town water, there's people working to make sure that gets delivered to you and that your sewage goes to the right place and treated so that you're not breathing in shit particles like a lot of people did in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's very easy to become complacent when there's somebody else doing a job for you. That's why you get such a great feeling of reward and accomplishment when you do something that is hard. The first time you build something, if you've never built something before, the first time you fix something that you would normally have to pay someone to fix, it's such an accomplishment because you're doing the work. Yesterday, August 26th, 2021, I'm sure anyone listening to this has heard about the attacks at the Kabul airfield. As of right now, as of recording this at 10:38 on Friday, August 27th, 13 service members were killed, mostly Marines. I'm reading conflicting reports about there might have been Army soldiers involved and a corpsman. To my knowledge, mostly Marines and a corpsman is all I know for sure. But regardless of branch, 13 service members are dead right now. There's at least 18 injured. Hundreds of Afghans have been killed and hundreds have also been wounded. You can listen to the generals, you can listen to the president about how this happened. I mean, it's pretty clear. And I know ISIS, I believe it's ISIS-K, has already claimed responsibility, which is good because then we know who to go after. But from what I understand, there are several checkpoints that were set up in order to get people into the airport. The first several are run by the Taliban, whom our president and generals yesterday referred to as our Afghan allies. Now, I'm willing to bet that anyone that wore a uniform and went overseas, or a civilian that went overseas as a contractor, their blood is boiling when that was said. Since when are the Taliban, the people who are forcing us out of the country at this time, the people who are responsible for harboring the terrorists which planned the attack which killed over 3,000 people on the 11th of September 2001, how are those assholes our Afghan allies? In no way, shape, or form are people that have tried to kill us and want us dead our allies. You can make the argument, well, the Germans were once against us and now they're our allies. That's correct, because they gave up. They surrendered, they admitted their wrongdoings, and now we work together. The Taliban has not done that. They are still actively against us, publicly. This is infuriating. And anyone who says the Taliban is our Afghan allies, I urge you to go spend some time with your allies and see how that plays out for you. As I mentioned, anyone who signs up and enlists in our military, regardless of branch, we sign up for a fight. Those 13 service members, they knew that there was a very real possibility, as I mentioned in my article, that they would be sent to a foreign country to fight and possibly not come home. We don't want that. Obviously, we don't want people to not come home. Right now, there are 13 families that just had their worlds rocked. And I don't feel sorry for anybody. Everyone knew the price. That was the cost that could have to be paid. I pray that their families have peace. I pray that they find strength through this time and in the time coming for them, because it's not going to get any easier. I pray that the service members killed, I pray that they rest in peace as well. I think the angering part for a lot of people is, man, it's so easy these days to get political, and I'm going to do my best to stay apolitical over this. This is a failed policy, and there is a difference between a failed strategy during war and a failed policy. Over the last, I would go with the last maybe 5+ years, somehow our politicians have decided that policy should be structured on popular belief from the American people. And in a way, it does. If a politician were to say, we've done the math and it seems like our policy moving forward is going to be to kill every firstborn baby, well, the American people aren't really for that. So you should kind of go off of opinion to a point. However, I've stated this to several people over the last 2 weeks, that instead, what has happened with Afghanistan is that politicians and members of the conventional traditional media have spent time planting the little seed inside people's ears, being the little fly that buzzes around saying, endless wars, get out of Afghanistan. We don't belong there. Endless wars. And it became a bumper sticker and a catchphrase that people were like, well, yeah, we shouldn't be there. They never bothered to think what would happen if we just pulled the cord. Some of us did. Stevie Wonder, wearing Ray Charles glasses, could see this coming from a mile away. This isn't an I told you so moment. I don't want it to be that, because honestly, half the shit I say, sometimes I really hope that I'm wrong. I don't want to be right on certain things, and I think a lot of people are like that. You want to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. This policy of removing ourselves from Afghanistan, while it might have been rooted in some good intention, has now been carried out recklessly. And now, there are a lot of people dead and hurt because of it. How is this different than a failed strategy during war? Well, obviously, a situation always dictates what is going to happen and what you are going to do. This is something else that was said during my time in basic training or any training environment for the Army. Situation dictates. Anytime something would be taught, they'd ask for questions. This is when the what ifs start popping up. Well, what if this? What if this happens? Well, what if that happens? And I remember very vividly a drill sergeant up in front of everybody, and he did his best to remain calm. This was a teaching moment, and he said, well, what if a purple dildo comes out of my forehead? He's like, you can what if all day. Ultimately, you have to have a base of training and be able to adapt when something happens. I believe, I'm going off the cuff here, I believe Mike Tyson was the one that said everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face. That might have been Mike Tyson. I'm not sure on that. But you get the plan. You get the point of what I'm trying to say. You can have a plan, and you can go to execute it. And on the battlefield, there are some unknowns. When you're going into a mission, this was never my case, but I've heard stories from people that would go, they'd be told we're going into this area. They get to that area, and there's one detail that they didn't plan for. So you have to fire and adjust. And ultimately, if there are too many missing pieces and you go in and it didn't work out, you go back when it's all said and done, and you say that was a failed strategy. How do we fix this moving forward to not do that again? And maybe strategy and policy are interchangeable sometimes. But in this instance, the policy was created on a buzzword. It was not based in any statistics. It wasn't based on any hard truth. We weren't at war. We were a presence to prevent things like this from happening. Do I think there would be a reality in which we could have removed ourselves and not had this happen? Yeah, I think so. It would have taken a very long time. There was no short term. There was no short term option for this. It would have to have taken some time. Essentially, you spend the time evacuating people first before it's a crisis. It's a crisis when you have hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people trying to get somewhere at the same time. It's not a crisis if you do a couple hundred here, a couple hundred there. Would the Taliban have still taken over after we left? Yeah. Yeah, they would have. But at least they wouldn't have the upper hand. At least they wouldn't have the leverage of, well, if you're not out by this day, there will be retaliations. well, yeah, you can hand us, we'll run these other checkpoints, and why don't you just give us a list of names so we know we can just let through? How about that? There's definitely not a chance that we're going to use that list of names to go kill them before they even have a chance to get here. There's not a chance that we'll do that. And from what I understand, these assholes, the Taliban, running these checkpoints, somehow ISIS bombers got through them and allowed this to happen. Do you mean to tell me the people who are known for being a terrorist organization and housing other terrorist organizations, specifically ones that allowed over 3,000 people to be killed on September 11th, 2001. You mean to tell me that they just let a bomber through to kill people? I don't believe it. I don't believe one word of it. They are our Afghan allies. Moving on. One of the complacency problems here is September 10th, 2001, we were not at war with anyone. That's a fact. You know what else is a fact? There were people at war with us. Two things can be true at once. Even once we declare the Afghanistan conflict over and war's over, there's going to be somebody else who declares war on us or that thinks they're at war with us. Complacency kills. Complacency is the reason why 13 service members are dead, and not their complacency. Don't get me wrong. The people on the ground right now, they are not being complacent. They are doing what needs to be done in order to complete the mission. It's the complacency of the politicians and the upper echelon military leaders. A controversial thought is we cannot save every Afghan citizen in that country. I don't feel it should be our responsibility to save every Afghan citizen. I agree that if they did work for us and provided us with help throughout the years there, yes, we do owe them a gratitude, and they should be brought here. I agree with that. But, to tie into this, I remember hearing on the news that the Taliban are going through an existential crisis. They kind of an identity crisis. They don't know if they want to be taken seriously on the world stage or not. I disagree. I've also heard it said that maybe it's America that's going through the identity crisis. I disagree with that as well, although that might actually be going on at a small scale. The people of Afghanistan, the average citizen, they are the ones that are actually going through an existential crisis at this time. They want to get the hell out, and I don't blame them. But they also want to fight. There are resistance fighters happening. There's one province in the country that has not been officially taken over by the Taliban due to the resistance fighting that is going on. These people can fight. They can and they should fight back. Not every Afghan army member that the news said just gave up to the Taliban. Not all of them did that. There were ones that fought back. They need to fight and take their country back. And it is not our responsibility to dictate who stays and who leaves. We can't play the world police all the time, and we can't rescue everyone. You may disagree with me on that one. And that's fine. The only people we owe a ride home, a ride out of that country to, is the American citizens who may be living there or working there, and the people who helped Afghan citizens that helped us throughout the war. Those are the only ones we owe a ride out. moving forward, what can we do? Because obviously it's always fun to point a finger. It's always, it's what everyone likes to do about everything. We like to point fingers. We like to play the blame game. But what do we do moving forward? Because pointing doesn't actually change anything. Can't change the past. Number one is we can stop electing the people that continue to put our country in a complacent posture. I said I was going to keep this apolitical. Man, it is really hard. I disagreed with President Trump's negotiations with the Taliban. We spent decades saying we don't negotiate with terrorists. And I agree with that. The only negotiation with them would be, you're going to let us do this, otherwise we will do this. End of discussion. I was not a fan of the fact that we gave legitimacy to the Taliban by sitting down and having a nice discussion with them about what we should or shouldn't do. Do I think that part of that discussion was necessary? Yeah, I'll allow that. I think, because I'm going to tie that into something else I have coming up here. But you know what? Right now, our current president, Joe Biden, has spent the last 8 months, almost 8 months, being proud of the fact that he has overturned, reversed, or gotten rid of policies set in place by President Trump. Things that were actually law have been reversed or countered. If this was such a bad plan, like Joe is saying it is, why not this one? Why could you not reverse this one? You've reversed some actually good ones, but this one's terrible, and everyone agrees it's terrible. So why didn't you reverse this one? Because of his actions right now, our country is in a really, really bad place. And it may not seem like it to you on your everyday life, but in the grand scale, the enemy is watching. That's what a lot of people don't realize. They've been sitting back, and they've been watching our response to the global war on terror for the last 19 years. They've been looking at our response to COVID. They've seen how we've been responding to the race relations in this country. They've seen it. They watch it. They study it. And while we're doing the action, they don't have to do anything right now. They can sit back and watch and take notes, because those notes are going to allow them to formulate a plan. I'm not even going to say who the enemies are. It doesn't need to be said. It doesn't matter who they are. But our actions, like it or not, are displayed on the world stage, and it allows our enemies who are watching to formulate a plan to use against us in one way, shape, or form. Part of leadership, I personally feel the number one thing of leadership. So without this one, the other ones really don't matter. When something good happens and you're in charge, doesn't matter if it's within your house, your team at work, or when you're president of the United States. And I feel this was something Trump was not good at either. When something good happens, you do not take credit for it. You give credit to those who executed the mission. You don't take credit for it. You don't say it was the best plan that you came up with or your administration came up with. You give credit to those who carried out the plan that ended up well. If something goes wrong, you drink a nice tall cup of Crow, and you admit that it was your fault. Because ultimately it is. If a mission fails, you as a leader are at fault because you either did not give the right information down, you didn't prepare them right, something's wrong that goes up to your level. One of the first things that Joe Biden did was pass the blame directly onto the Trump administration. That was the worst thing that he could have done. Well, it's not my fault. As I said, Trump was guilty of this too. It was always his best plan and never his fault. So I will put criticism where criticism is due. What else can you do? Have more conversations with people that have experiences that you have no clue or opinion about. You never thought about joining the military? Don't care about the military? Like, I don't mean you don't care about them. You're just indifferent. Why don't you find someone who's currently in or was in and just have a conversation? Listen. Listen to people that have done things that you won't or haven't done. In this case, I believe the last 19 years have been filled with current military and veterans trying to give an opinion about all of this and either never being asked about it, not being listened to about it, or just flat out ignored. And honestly, that's what hurts. It hurts of the millions of Americans who haven't bothered to give a flying fuck about what is going on with our military. And they only wait till something bad happens to start asking questions. Well, maybe if you asked questions a little sooner, you wouldn't have been chanting this bumper sticker slogan of endless wars, let's pull out of Afghanistan. You wouldn't have been chanting that for the last 5 to 10 years. And lastly, make contingency plans for everything. Always have a backup plan. You don't need to what if till you're blue in the face or till a purple dildo comes out your forehead, as my drill sergeant so eloquently put it. But you need to have a contingency plan. I'm just going to say this once. As we're seeing play out right now, federal governments, they're not going to save you. They're not coming for you. You need to be prepared for you. I don't care if that means learning some first aid and not just put a Band-Aid on. Actually learning what to do if a gunshot wound were to be in front of you. Learning about massive cuts and tourniquets. Being prepared with actual first aid kits ready to go. Instead of a hypothetical, actually having it in front of you ready to go. Practice it. Teach others about it. Like your family. Instead of relying on the police, which may or may not get stressed out in the future and be tied up doing something else during a big situation where you might need them. How about you learn how to defend yourself? Learn how to defend yourself physically, whether it's karate, jiu-jitsu, whatever it is you want to do, some form of physical hand-to-hand martial art. Maybe it's a gun. I don't know what it's the scary thing that no one should want to talk about. You know, it's bad, evil. But you know what? It can save your life. And we'd never talk about those situations where it can save your life. And it's not good enough just to own one, but learn how to use it, learn how to maintain it. And like I said, learn how to use it in as many environments as you can. Maybe this contingency plan is food. Learning how to grow and hunt. Provide for your family. Have stuff ready to go at a moment's notice. Have a go bag. And look, I don't have all, I'm not Joe prepared over here. I'm not Joe ready. But you know what? So I need to do some of this myself. But there's some people who have never even given a thought to this. That's all I got for now. I hope this is the last time that I have to have a talk like this about Afghanistan. I wanted to make this as straightforward as possible, front toward enemy, and we'll see how things play out in the upcoming days and weeks. Hopefully it's short term and we're not faced with these issues long term. I hope that somebody at a certain level finds a way to dislodge their cranium from inside the rectal cavity so that we can move forward with this and not be in a defensive posture all the damn time. Hopefully, that can happen. And we won't be in a complacency posture. A complacent posture. For the sake of my children and their children to come. That's all I got. Talk to you next time.